Holy cow, welcome back to another episode of the Boxscore Geeks show. And we're actually at full strength and only 1 week of load management. So maybe we're nearing the end. I'm your host, Ray Alvarez, found most places as Nerd Numbers. With me, as always, producer, voice of God, man of many hats, Brian Foster. And welcome back, Patrick Minton, the original NBA geek.
Hey, thanks for having me again.
Yeah, thanks for having you on your own show.
Well, I
on
mean,
your
the way
own
you
show on
introduce
your
me,
own
it's
network.
kind of like I'm a guest because you guys are on here a lot more often than I am.
Well, I think it's kind of one of those funny things where a lot of times with the podcast, I think with you and Dave, it's, this is a hobby for all of us. And then it's like, you're in charge and Dave was in charge, of course, the wages of wins. And it's like, hey, I'm busy. As long as you're not, spraying hateful stuff on my website, doing horrible things, do what you want. It's like, yeah. So
I am very anti-hate.
You hate, and then you'll get those stupid pedantic people on the net that think they're being clever. They're like, if you're intolerant towards intolerance, are you really much better? And the answer is yes.
Shout out to the Anti-Defamation League.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, truth be told, you and I both, Patrick, kind of, I don't know. It's interesting if maybe for opposite reasons. I think we haven't been heavily invested in watching NBA recently, but of course want to get our reps in and do have lots of cool stuff to discuss. And mine really was more right. It was Easter Sunday recently, had my family out, the goodest news for those of you in the present and hopefully in the future with the COVID pandemic of 2020 and 2021, which is ridiculous that it lasted 2 seasons, is that vaccines are starting to become more norm. I was able to see my parents for, first time in months at this point, first time since last year, because they're both double vaccinated. So maybe we're coming towards the end.
I got my first shot a couple weeks ago.
Actually. Great.
That's awesome. Don't want to single you out if you're the odd man out on the podcast, Brian, but you vaccinated too. Is the Boxscore Geek going to be full strength soon?
Well, if I'm going to get doxxed like this, yes, I have my first shot scheduled for tomorrow.
So I mean,
it's coming soon.
Going. That is awesome.
I'll believe it when it happens, though, when that needle's in my arm. Before that,
I was same exact boat with when you get your appointment. It's like you just don't believe it's real. Yep. I mean, even seeing all the good news, I agree. Yeah. Weird news. I was seeing some stats. Apparently, we're doing better than Canada at vaccination. So that's with how much we mucked up everything else. I was going to say from an on-off statistic perspective, it's almost like there was something with how we handled the vaccine or handled the pandemic before the vaccine and after, and there was just something that could explain the difference between those 2 periods of time. Maybe we could explain it, but as we've said, on-off statistics are really just very, very noisy, so it's hard to know.
You don't want to get me started on this. We can rant about this.
Okay, wise decisions. So what I've got on my script, a very light script, Patrick.
Speaking of wise.
Oh yeah, I was going to say, speaking of wise, we're going to talk Wiseman, and we're just going to stay in our own wheelhouse. We're going to stay with the Boxscore Geeks home teams of choice. So we're going to talk the Warriors, the Nuggets, and the Wolves for different reasons, and then I'm going to tack on a chess thing at the end because that's what I do. I always do that. All right, let's start with wise.
A slim hope that soon my home team will not be in Minnesota.
Yes, and that is topic number 2. Topic number 1 is about James Wiseman. There's a lot interesting here. So one thing I was curious if either of you saw this article, and I think it was behind a paywall. Funny trick I want to give people out there. If you're a web developer, using the F12 key, you can see developer tools and actually view the page source, the raw HTML of a page. So if you come to an article that hypothetically gets blocked and says you have to be a member to subscribe, if you're just interested in the raw text, if they have rendered the text, you can view the page and read the article. Throwing that out there as a life hack. If you don't feel like paying $5 to the San Francisco Chronicle to read a bullshit article about the Warriors. And I bring this up because I saw an article about the Warriors that basically proved something to me, Brian, which was the Warriors were going to brag about their smart analytics squad no matter what the fuck was going on. Because the article was saying the Warriors analytics squad is helping Steve Kerr through a tough season. And this one line in it blew my mind. It said that Steve Kerr was struggling, or James Wiseman was struggling, so Steve Kerr took him out of the rotation. But his analytics squad showed him that for player development, it was better for young players to work through rough patches. So Steve Kerr put him back in. And this was an article trying to brag about the smart analytics squad of the Warriors and how they were helping Steve Kerr. And basically they said, you know, that bad player that is literally keeping an MVP caliber season of Steph Curry from getting you to the playoffs, leave him in.
Yeah.
And I've got Brian speechless.
Oh no, I'll let Patrick go first.
I mean, it goes back to this, like, this ridiculous concept / math that the entire NBA has always been subject to, where they believe that some nebulous future outcome is worth more than some nebulous promised possibility of some future outcome that is great is always worth more than a certain good outcome today. Like, that's what many NBA teams believe, right? It's like the whole myth about, like, what was it? The wheel of mediocrity or whatever, right?
The treadmill, yeah. The treadmill.
So it's ridiculous because that future outcome is, like, I think as the treadmill of loserdom that is Orlando can demonstrate, they've been rebuilt. I was on a radio show in 2011. I think it was 2011, maybe 2012. I got invited by Mark Ryan to go on a radio show there to interview. Like, this was just right around the time when Dave Barry released this research saying that most rebuilding teams still suck after the 5 years of rebuilding, right?
And I'm trying to remember what that far ago was that when Dwight Howard
was right
just
after
left?
It was right after the Dwight Howard trade. So this must have been what, 2010, 11? It was like within 6 months of the Dwight Howard trade, and because in my brain is 2009 stuck as like peak Dwight Howard, so it must have been like a year and a half after that or something like that, right? And anyway, I'm on there and I talk about how, the evidence shows that most teams that do this tanking to rebuild, if you fast forward 3 to 5 years, guess what? They still suck, right? So that future outcome of, if we just tank for a few years, we can be great. It's the probability of that happening is just so much lower than most NBA GMs take for granted. And that's wrapped up in another problem, which is tomorrow's GM is probably not me, so it's also not my problem, right? Most GMs are incentivized.
Yeah, that's
tank because while you're tanking, as long as you're tanking, you get to pull out the "don't judge me on wins and losses because we're tanking" card, and that's like job security for 2 or 3 years. But anyway, to get back to my point, like, all of them value that more than they value current success. And the reality is, when you have a player like Steph Curry, your window is now. And even if your window is only to, let's say, second round of the playoffs, you should be striving really hard to get there because it's worth a lot of money. Like, getting into the playoffs is worth a ton of money, and getting a draft pick who might be good in 3 years is not worth a lot of money. Even if you're sitting there fantasizing about how it's all going to pan out in 3 or 4 years, it's not worth a lot of money. If we look at the actual sort of expected value in a financial sense, it's not worth more than simply doing well now. And so the fact that analytics department is like, oh, you should do this because it's really important for James Wiseman. It's like, well, that's fucking great for James Wiseman, but what's good for the Warriors?
Yeah.
Well, what's also rough is there's an easy two-parter, and I'm curious about that data that they're saying, right? They need to just work through it. But what a bigger issue is with young players, I've stressed this before. We're talking oldies but goodies, right, Patrick? Common things that come up. I've brought up Kobe Bryant, Dirk Nowitzki. I think Manu Ginobili would probably be a good example as well. A couple of like marquee players that weren't even starters. Kawhi is the other one, of course, I was thinking of. So Kawhi, Kobe, Dirk, all finals MVPs, all franchise players for their respective team at one point or other in their career. All of them came off the bench initially. All of them were ramped up slowly.
You're forgetting the original Scottie Pippen.
Oh, was Scottie Pippen off the bench originally? Really?
I don't know if he was off the bench, but he was not very good.
He wasn't
about 2 or 3 years in, right? Same with.
But I'm not even talking the development process. I'm just saying these teams ramped that player up slowly. And to what you're saying, there should be a combination, which is to say, on the Warriors, I even wrote, this was one of the few articles I've written this year on the Boxscore Geeks, is I basically said, if they just give that starting job to Kevon Looney, then basically Wiseman can come off the bench when it's not going to impact the game and still get his reps in. Or at this point, we're getting a G League team. I was on Ben Guest's podcast. I was a guest on Ben Guest's podcast. That's a fun sentence to say. And he said something aloud that I don't know if I've ever suggested directly, Patrick. I'd be curious if you like this idea. He said, you should aim for 10 late second round picks and just make a G League team out of them. And what I loved about that is the exact same thing that they're saying is the Warriors are trying to say, you can't bench Wiseman. It's really important to let him play. It's really important to develop. The bigger line they're probably saying is Wiseman is a marquee player in terms of draft pedigree. And if you don't give him the minutes, one, he's going to get unhappy with us, and two, his trade value is going to plummet. So essentially what they're saying is you need to keep Wiseman's trade value up. Otherwise, we can't trade him, which everybody, same point that you've said about believing it when you see it, Brian, but I'll believe it when I see it that the Warriors are going to package Wiseman up for a star that's going to deliver the Warriors to the promised land. They're saying they're targeting Kawhi, but that's what, in terms of tricks you were talking about, Patrick, right? That GMs pull. Every GM pulls that trick when they're tanking too. Oh yeah, we're losing this year, but LeBron James is a free agent next year, and we've got a very compelling offer to him.
This is the Knicks for like 10 years straight.
Yeah.
Right. There was always the free agent class that the Knicks were going to clean up in, and it never happened.
Yeah, and I mean, I do absolutely love that Brooklyn is a fully operational, because I talked this a little bit about on Ben Guest podcast as well. For those that don't know, the Nets for a period of time, because of they were a former ABA team, they were paying a portion of their television revenue to the defunct Spirits of St. Louis squad. And additionally, for most of their franchise history, they were in New Jersey. The reason was the same reason. They were from the ABA. They merged with the NBA. They were the New York Nets. And the Knicks said, that's our territory. You have to pay us money because you're infringing on our territory, and go across the river. And now they're back. So the Knicks, I thought that was funny because everybody was saying Kyrie and Durant were going to team up with DeAndre Jordan, because DeAndre Jordan was on the Knicks at the time, and go to New York. And that was 100% true, just wrong franchise.
Well, I think the Nets are a great example of you don't have to tank to get good again, because everyone. So after the Paul Pierce, Kevin Garnett trade, that I think that the Nets paid 4 or 5 first-round draft picks for them or something like that, right?
It is criminal. Just as a brief cut-in, it is criminal how little Boston came out strong with Tatum, but it is criminal how little they capitalized on how much of a fleecing that trade was. After the Markelle Fultz trade, right. I thought they were set, and then they just sat and did nothing.
I mean, rewind to what I just said 5 minutes ago, right? Whatever packages you're going to have in 3 years aren't worth as much as you think they are, right? But anyway, everyone was okay, the Nets are done now. If they once that window with Pierce and KG closes, they're done. They're completely washed, right? Because they're gonna lose so many draft picks. And what happened? I mean, it's 5 years later, and they're back to being amongst the best teams in the league. And how? Well, they spent money, right? It kind of turns out draft picks are great assets, but you, any asset, you can kind of pay money for them. Most franchises, if they want to, they can just open the pocketbook and they can get themselves some draft picks, right? You just have to kind of pay money for them. You have to make deals that are unfavorable to you from a financial perspective, but then you can get draft picks, right? And in my mind, when you're in a zero-sum game, trying to win the NBA championship, any asset that can simply be traded for cash isn't that valuable, right?
Yes, so, that's huge.
A first-round draft pick can pretty much be traded for cash. You have to do some salary cap hijinks and stuff, but for the most part, you can just buy yourself a draft pick. You cannot just buy yourself a LeBron. You cannot just buy yourself a Chris Paul or a Kawhi Leonard, etc. But you can buy yourself a lottery pick, and therefore the lottery pick is a commodity, which means it has value, but it isn't the thing that you need to value the most. And the thing you need to value the most is there are probably 10 to 15 players that can swing a team into contendership in the entire NBA. In the 450 players or whatever, there's probably 10 or 15 that can be the difference between being like mediocre and being a contender. And those 10 or 15, they aren't commodities. I wrote an article about this a long time ago. They're Picassos, right? They're not cars. They're not houses. They are Picassos. They are that rare. And as anyone knows, has ever tried to buy a rare painting, a Picasso or a Banksy or whatever, you can't just trade it for cash. You can't just assume that you can go out and buy them, because you have to wait until somebody puts one up for auction. And then maybe if you outbid everyone else, you can buy them, right? Whereas a draft pick, pretty much if you're willing to pay something in the order of like $6 million or so, you can buy yourself a draft pick.
It's funny.
You might have to do some salary cap hijinks, but you can do it. Right.
I mean, it's a fantastic metaphor and its premise, but then, whenever you try and extend a metaphor and it's like, it doesn't quite hold. The funny thing on the Picasso point, which, that's something we quote all the time, the Patrick Picasso principle. We've linked that forever with blitz scaling, with Chris Ye's point about how what you need to do to succeed, right? You really capitalize on fleeting value, right? But the other aspect that's funny is with a Picasso, let's say you get a Picasso at the auction. There is not a case in that scenario where you piss off the Picasso and it says, look, I know you paid 20 million for me, but fuck you. But that's what happens in the NBA. And I mean, we've seen this happen multiple times, right? Maybe
fine wine is the better, because the other thing that doesn't happen with the Picasso is the Picasso isn't like 5 years later all worn down and like tired and it won't hang on your wall anymore, right? Whereas Chris Paul's probably got like 2 good years left in him, and then we're done. LeBron's probably got like 10 more, but I mean, like, players essentially become shadows of their former selves.
We've been saying that about Chris Paul for about 10 years already, though. He just
really
keeps defying gravity.
If it wasn't for this shortened season, it would be a shoo-in. But Chris Paul is going to hit 10 wins produced now on 4 NBA teams. And I think it's hilarious to look at him at his career and say he has been in 3 what the hell were you thinking trades now in his career to the other team. And that's got to be insanely rare, because even like your Kevin Garnett point, right? Kevin Garnett from Minnesota to Boston, you're like, that one, even on paper, you're like, in the realms of losing a star, you can view that one as he was on his way out the door anyway, so at least you got something back, so it's not the worst in the world. But you still, a couple of years after the fact, to your point, right, the assets in the future versus the star now, you laugh and say, oh, the star now, of course. But his second trade, you're mentioning his trade to the Nets was bad. Chris Paul's been in 3 trades that are hilarious, and I mean, because
the most hilarious being the one from Houston, where Houston paid to get rid of him, which is absolutely
Tillman Fertitta saying, and I hope I got the name right, saying that Chris Paul was on the worst contract in the NBA. I tweeted about this, I think, a week or 2 ago, but I had to laugh because exactly what you're saying, Patrick. He traded Chris Paul, 2 first-round picks and 2 first-round pick swaps, which with how the Rockets are playing looks like those are actually essentially first-round picks.
Oh yeah, that's amazing too.
They traded that for Russell Westbrook. Then after a season of Russell Westbrook, they traded Russell Westbrook for John Wall and a pick. So it's like, how's that working out for you? You've got John Wall, who, it's funny, John Wall's terrible, and he's saying, I know people expect me not to play so we can tank, but I'm going to play. To be fair, that's helping him tank, so that's good at least.
I mean, the Chris Paul thing is like I was saying last year, I was like, I hate to break it to you folks, but he's actually not overpaid. But I pandered to the masses, and I was like, okay, I'm going to bet on OKC, because even if you think Chris Paul is overpaid, there's a difference between overpaying for a good player and overpaying for a terrible player, right? And obviously Chris Paul, at the very worst, lies in that latter category, right? But I think you kind of look at the results now in Phoenix, and like a lot of people have been, what I've seen a lot in the Twitter sphere the last couple of months is a lot of people asking, like, so if Steve Nash won MVP for going to the Suns, when you look at his impact, and Jason Kidd was in MVP conversations when he went to the Suns, like, shouldn't we be talking about Chris Paul for MVP right now? And if Jokic weren't having the ridiculous season he's having, I think there'd be a very serious conversation to be had of like, should Chris Paul be an MVP candidate? Like he won't be, but I think he should be. Like he's,
he's that
the
good.
way he's turned around that, and it's like, yeah, they have other players too, but I mean, that's the impact he's had there is pretty spectacular, and it's kind of amazing what can happen when you simply put a point guard on the court who, creates a lot of assists and generates a positive passing culture, I'll call it, and then also doesn't turn the ball over. That's kind of always been Chris Paul's shtick, right? Is like, I create a lot of assists and I fucking don't give the ball up. And
in terms of offense,
a lot of point guards don't do well, right?
In terms of offense, because that's the other thing. He doesn't take bad shots. Like, he's one of those players that's frustrating as hell, because when you look at his shooting efficiency from every place, it's, we tell most players never take a mid-range jumper.
And Chris Paul that.
Yeah, Chris Paul, Kevin Durant, and the frustrating one, DeMar DeRozan. But unlike Chris Paul, DeMar DeRozan can't hit threes to save his life. So
yeah. The thing about Paul that's just amazing is that he, at his height of like 6'2" or 6'3" or whatever he is, right? His ability to shoot that shot against a bunch of opponents, a bunch of defenders who know he's going to shoot that shot, is kind of ridiculous, right? And I think he's always been amazing in that, like, assist to turnover category. That so we praise a lot of players who have high assists because assists are valuable, right? But if you look at a lot of them, even Steve Nash had pretty high turnover numbers compared to Chris Paul, right? Because Steve Nash was actually, the dirty secret about Steve Nash is the reason he got so many assists is because he's a great scorer, right? Whereas
good. I was afraid you were going to go mean there. Okay.
The reason Chris Paul gets so many assists is he's a great passer. He is a good scorer, but he's nowhere near in the category of Steve Nash, right? And it's kind of like it, but it's quiet and it's kind of unspectacular for the most part, but it's so valuable, right?
Oh, absolutely.
And for the audio-only listeners, we do have the wins produced up right now, current as of today, April 12th. Chris Paul is tied with Steph Curry at 8th/9th in the league. They both have 9 wins produced already.
I feel so bad for Steph Curry because he's putting up 2015-16 numbers, but he won't sniff the MVP, right? Even though he's arguably more valuable than he was then, because then he was doing it on a team that would have been like probably good/decent if he got injured. And now he's doing it on a team that is literally the worst team in the NBA when he's not on the court.
Hey, while we've got this screen up, I have to say shout out to Jimmy Butler, who is by far the best per minute wins player this year. He hasn't played as many minutes as a lot of the other players up at the top, but man, is he having a great year.
This has been an awesome season for some of our favorites. Jimmy Butler in Miami, Chris Paul being the second coming of Steve Nash in Phoenix, as we just discussed, and of course my boy Jokic. To finish up on kind of the Warriors, just kind of my Wiseman point. So what's happening right now is Wiseman just went down injured, and they're saying it's not long-term is what their hope is. And it's funny because I don't really have a direction one way or the other on that. We never root for injury, so hoping for a speedy recovery. And just some names I want to throw out there for Wiseman are actually Kevin Durant, and I may or may not have an article in me on that. We're comparing Wiseman to Kevin Durant, because Kevin Durant was a fantastic draft pick, and you would be lying if you said you didn't want him on your squad with hindsight bias. But if you were a contender in 2000, when did he come out? 2008? I can't remember if it was the 2009 season, but whenever he came out.
Something like that.
Okay, so 7 was, so they were still in Seattle for his rookie year.
Yep.
Was it even his second year? I don't remember. But I remember when he won the rookie of the year, I was like, well, that's a joke because he was terrible. Let's be honest. Kevin Durant, the rookie, was freaking terrible. He shot so poorly and so much, which is a really bad combination. And just now granted, Seattle probably wanted him to because they were perfectly happy being terrible, but oh my gosh, he was bad. And even in his second season, he was not particularly good. Somewhere though along the line, he flipped some switch, and all the shots that all the sort of bad shots that where he was shooting a subpar efficiency suddenly turned into crazy high efficiency. And somewhere in his 2012 season, I think it was, they showed the like his shot chart, the Kirk Goldsberry shot chart, and which is the shot chart that like it's like yellow or green. Yellow is average, and red is like below average. Yep. Green is above. And Kevin Durant was green from like the fucking backcourt. He was green everywhere. It was insane, right? And like, but he was not good as a rookie. He was terrible. Very much not good. But I think that doesn't necessarily mean anything. Like, it's actually kind of normal. Like,
yes,
here's an unpopular opinion. LeBron James was not good as a rookie.
That's true, right? Also.
And like that's totally normal. You go from playing against kids in
high school in his case, and high school in LeBron's case.
Yeah, high school in LeBron's game, obviously, but like to playing against grown men who can throw you around. Well, probably not in LeBron's case, but I mean, Kevin Durant, remember those pictures where you look at Shaq in college and Shaq later and like, holy cow, look at all that muscle mass. Do the same with Kevin Durant. Look at his rookie season. Like, holy cow, he was a stick figure. And, he couldn't finish around the rim, and he wasn't a particularly great shooter from outside. But if you looked at his college numbers, he had probably one of the top 10 college seasons of all time, right? There was no doubt.
I've got a question for you as a coach, by the way, on that. And this has been something that has been bugging me forever about college is it useful to train future NBA stars on a different three-point line than the NBA three? Does it make any sense at all? Like,
I mean, I think the question I would ask is the NCAA in the business of training future NBA stars, or is it in the business of creating a great product for its customers? And I think it's the latter.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
So they could make an NBA 3-point line, and that would be better for the like 1% of the 1% of the NCAA that goes on to become NBA players. But it would be better. It would be worse for the product, right?
Like, and that's the thing. And we've been talking that forever about the NBA itself. And we were kind of saying this, interestingly enough, I believe with it was with how am I dropping his name on the Pelicans, Zion. With Zion going, if the NBA is going to suddenly just start going, you are a horrible place for us to trust our athletes. A point you're making about both Shaquille O'Neal and Kevin Durant with like their muscle masses, despite the fact that I would wage that every single top NCAA program breaks these rules. There are rules about how much you are allowed to train, how much you are allowed to practice. There are rules in place about how much money you're allowed to give athletes for things like food, right. Which is when you think about 7-foot monsters, right? Like I've got a 4-year-old who is projected to be the same size as a starting NBA point guard, and dear God, I don't know how I'm going to afford to feed him when he's in high school.
Yeah.
And he's 4 years old right now. So to think about having a 7-foot athlete, a 7-foot teenage metabolism athlete that's playing professional ball on a
healthy
regular
frame, right? Like, a lot of the 7-footers in the world, they kind of grew in some spurt, and then so they end up with this very unhealthy frame, right? Because they grew like, they did like the David Robinson style, like he's 6'2" at the age of 18, and then he's like 7 feet tall in the NBA, right? But
weren't you telling me something about that, Brian, about like Greg Oden like had an injury, like he had a ligament disconnect just because he grew so much? Or is that someone else?
That sounds right. Yeah, that sounds right.
Definitely had some screwed up things in his body for sure. But like I think the NBA has caught on to this. Like you're seeing that with the G League contracts that can be bigger and stuff now. And I'm actually kind of.
Well, so we've got the G League Ignite this year, right? The players that did not go to college all went to the Ignite, and then Jarrett Jack is randomly the point guard at 38. But the Ignite's going to put 2 players in the top 5 of the draft probably. Kuminga and Green are both from the Ignite.
Yeah, you're going to see a lot more of that. I mean, like LaMelo kind of is also like somebody who
he did the same thing
overseas, and now that the G League is kind of an option, because previously, like if you were I want to say like a top 10 lottery pick candidate, you could make so much more money overseas than you could come into the G League, right? But I think they're changing that. You can now make, I think it's like a couple $100,000 in the G League, which is for for an 18-year-old is pretty good money, and
for anybody that's
well, sorry, for an 18-year-old that's very likely to get into the NBA. It's still pretty decent money, right? Given that you can't get into the NBA yet, and I think the NBA is catching on to this, that that they don't need to subsidize the NCAA's product, right? I think if you go back 10, 20 years, the NBA thought of the NCAA as like, well, it's a farm system, but for free, right? And now they're starting to realize, well, actually, they're a farm system that's taking away the first couple of
you get what you
years
pay
of
for,
our product,
right?
Yeah.
And risking hurting player development. You know, the players that we know we have to draft. You know, Michael Porter Jr. is actually a fantastic example. Looking great for the Nuggets. Actually, I'll make the Nuggets a quick topic because I really like the Wolves as a big one. So we'll just
Yeah,
do
we
Nuggets
got 5 minutes.
Oh, holy cow! Or what? 5 minutes? Is Patrick gone at 45?
I
That's
can
right.
go a little over.
Okay, why don't we do the Wolves so we can actually talk the Wolves, and then we could, you know, you can, when I start blathering about the Nuggets or chess, you can just taper off. So anyway, the Wolves, I forget the group, but basically A-Rod and his friend are looking at purchasing the Wolves. That, as you told me pre-show, Patrick had signed a letter of intent, which means for about a month and a half, no one else can bargain to do it. And I don't know, do you have a read on how optimistic you can be about this? I mean, that seems good, but who knows what Glenn Taylor's going to do.
I mean, I think it's going to happen, right? I mean, like, I think if I understand how it works, the letter of intent goes both ways. So if Taylor was willing to sign it too, that means he's optimistic a deal could get done. So unless financing falls through or something silly like that, I imagine this is going to happen. And a lot of people are speculating that A-Rod wants to take them to Seattle, which would be perfectly fine by me.
Yeah.
You know, who knows? It's just kind of, it's very unclear to me what kind of an owner Alex Rodriguez would be. I mean, he was obviously one of the greatest baseball players of all time, but whether or not he knows anything about basketball or knows anything about like creating a successful business organization kind of remains unclear to me. I'm becoming increasingly clear when it comes to ownership that whether or not you succeed in the NBA comes down to whether or not you can create a successful business organization and not whether you know anything about basketball. Because if you look at how most NBA teams operate, they're like some random owner, some random privileged heir of a fortune, right? Who kind of every 4 to 5 years changes his mind about who should be in charge of of everything because it's not working out, and never bothers to actually establish an organization with its rules of what constitutes success. And so I think if you look at the model organizations, probably like the Spurs and frankly probably the Warriors too here, where they're not strictly talking about basketball as success, they're saying what makes this organization a success and creating an organizational culture, an organizational system of values that leads to success, such that, you know, you can go out and hire the right people, and then when those people get jobs at other places and leave, you can hire more great people that come in and take their place, right? So there's these Spurs people that are all throughout the league, because if you do a rotation on Pop's bench, eventually somebody considers you a candidate for head coach elsewhere.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, despite all that talent leaving the Spurs are still good. And it's because they've created an organizational culture around what are the values that we care about? What are the things that make us a succeeding organization? And there are things like being willing to embrace change, being willing to like look at, like, if you look at how Pop coaches now and how Pop coaches 15 years ago, it's totally different. But it's because he's not married to any one philosophy. He's married to success. And I think time can only tell if Alex Rodriguez is going to be an owner that can do those kinds of things. But time has definitely told us that Glenn Taylor is not a person who can do that thing, right? He runs his business precisely the same way he ran it 20 years ago. Hasn't changed a damn thing about it. And that is part of the reason that he's terrible as an owner.
I did like one thing we were talking pre-show that I wanted to make sure you got on the air, Patrick, which was, I noted that someone very flippantly said, you know, despite the fact that you're going to see articles like Glenn Taylor purchased the Wolves for X amount and it's now worth over it's going to sell for over $1 billion, no question. The question is
$1.5 billion is the valuation.
I wouldn't be shocked if it was higher when it sold. I who knows, but I'm going to throw that out there right
now. That's what they hammer out over the next 45 days, right?
I'm saying I'm going to take the over on 1.5, like comfortable.
I think I will refuse to bet against you.
Okay, nice, like love it. Okay, so that I win. Okay, so perfect. So
that's not how this works.
But I make the bet. Vegas doesn't agree to my line. They have to give me money. Isn't that how it works?
No.
You win the bet, but no money
here, and I'm telling you that your bet is refused.
Oh, dang. Okay. So anyway, but people will note if he had taken that money and basically put it in the NASDAQ, he would be worth more money. And one thing I like, though, is you made sure to come back with another popular myth that people forget about this, which is when teams talk about their finances publicly, their revenue streams, which we will definitely see if the NBA heads towards a lockout, how much bullshit that is. And I liked your point on, I think the phrasing you said, and I'll let you elaborate a little this on this, and then you can decide if you want to hop off after, is basically that, Glenn Taylor's been getting dividends on the Wolves, even if he's been managing them terribly.
Yeah, I mean, he bought them for, I think it was like 300 million in change. Is that right? And he's going to sell them for 1.5 billion. That's like a 5x return, which was actually kind of terrible over a 20-year period.
And that's what people are saying. Yeah.
Again, I want to retire in 20 years. I sure as hell hope that I'm going to make more than 5x on my money in those 20 years, right? Because I want to be getting a better investment on my money, right? And let me rephrase that portion of my money that I have in the stock market, like the ones that I'm like kind of investing for a return. I'm obviously not going to like quintuple my money in my bonds and my money markets and stuff like that, right? But the stuff that I'm actively investing, I want to get more than 5x over a 20-year period, or I'm probably not doing it right? But the flip side of that is when you own an NBA team, I'm pretty sure you're making a profit. Again, regardless of what he puts on the accounting statement when he has to file his taxes, I'm pretty sure he makes profit. And so how much profit is that? I can't tell you. I don't know. That's part of the sort of mystery of the accounting sheets and the fact that they are public corporations in that sense, right? But the odds are he's taken home a fair penny each year from operations, right? And paying that as a dividend to himself and the other minority owners. So I don't think it's quite fair to say that that's all he's going to make. Now, whether or not it still would have been better to be just investing in, a Fortune 500 companies, I don't know. That's a good sort of point to make. Like, obviously, you put his money in Amazon.
Well, I would say a couple of things. Given the size of the Minnesota market, had he just done better with that squad, the team would now be worth more, right? Like the Warriors,
yeah.
Well, because I mean, the Warriors, right, upped themselves to being, they are in theory, according to Forbes, and again, that's very nebulous because it's exactly what you're saying about your Picasso point. It's based on who will buy them when. The Warriors have vaulted themselves in theory to be the second most valuable franchise, even though right now, right, they really have one good player.
Yeah.
But it's those titles. So had the Wolves made one or two championships and maybe won one with Kevin Garnett, which was very, very plausible, who knows what their value would be now. And the last point I want to give you before we end this is something Arturo, American Numbers on Twitter, if you don't follow him, has brought up, is that the amazing tax rules around owning a professional sports franchise in North America are ridiculous. We have some of the worst tax laws in general that let billionaires, stow their money, and teams are away. So that's the reason you're bringing that up. How do we know if they're making money or losing money? It's because our laws basically allow them to amortize things, to write off losses. That's one thing I believe that the New York Knicks do, is basically, because they're a bigger corporation, they can write the losses of that corporation into the Knicks. So the Knicks are losing money, but really you're, funneling money around. So I think
they're funneling money from Madison Square Garden into the Knicks.
And so to your point on the Wolves, I think that's another point, is right. He's been making money that we don't know of. And then also,
to make the easiest sort of metaphor for those of you who aren't like super into finance and accounting and tax laws, here's an easy one, right?
To this show, why?
Yeah, exactly. Imagine you are the sole owner of a corporation that employs like 2 people, right? And you decide that the corporation needs a car, so you buy a car, and then you use that car, and the corporation buys the car, right? And you use that car. The corporation then gets to actually gets a tax break for the depreciation of that car over 3 years, whereas you, as a personal individual who bought a car, would not get any such tax break, right? And then after the 3 years, the corporation sells the car, puts it in the corporation's accounts, and then goes out and buys a different car, and then starts to depreciate that over 3 to 5 years. And you are driving that car as a person because you are a part of that corporation. What that means is you, as a person, you never had to buy a car, compared to me and you who don't own a company. We had to buy a car. So how much is that worth? Like, how much per year are you making by virtue of the fact that you didn't have to buy a car, and you didn't have to pay insurance on your car, and you didn't have to pay gas for that car because the corporation was the thing paying all those things, right? Like, that's worth money. Like, that's compared to me and you're making what? I don't know, 10, 15 grand a year by virtue of not paying for those things that you and I would have to pay for. But that doesn't show up anywhere on your personal tax income statement because it's all part of the corporation, and the corporation has all these extra rules around.
And then the corporation says, "Hey, we're losing 15,000 a year on cars.
I'm buying these cars that I keep losing money on." Right? That's the difference between you and a corporation. And every NBA team, you can multiply that concept by many hundredfolds, right? The corporation of the New York Knicks or the Minnesota Timberwolves, they are doing tons of that kind of stuff where they're buying something that an owner gets a very tangible benefit from that the owner would otherwise have to buy for themselves if they didn't happen to own this NBA team, right? But that doesn't show up anywhere on the balance sheet, right? Yep. Or if it does, it's to some benefit from a tax perspective, right?
And I was going to say, you got your MBA, correct, Patrick?
I do have an MBA.
I was going to say, you definitely got your money's worth. Anyway, I mean, I was going to say, I'm fine to go a little longer, Brian, but I definitely want to give you the option.
I can give you four more minutes if you value that.
If you value, I just want to share this with you, Patrick, because I thought you'd get a kick out of this. So there's been some drama in the chess world around Hikaru Nakamura, who has a very popular streaming on Twitch site. And basically what has happened is he had an account manager, and the account manager, possibly Hikaru, who knows, this is where it gets all nebulous. His account manager went out and gave a bunch of copyright strikes to other competing YouTube channels. And YouTube is a really flawed, broken system, as I'm sure you know, Brian, where you can have a station, right? You can have a YouTube channel with lots and lots of money, but if it gets too many strikes, the channel can get shut down. And if you're someone that depends on regular revenue, that's a huge deal.
Yeah.
And the other problem is YouTube's copyright strike system is terrible. Basically, it is way too lenient without human intervention to let someone copyright something. For instance, hypothetically, as the Boxscore Geeks, we could start claiming that people were using our videos without our permission and put a strike on them. And it could be the case that our video doesn't show up at all. We were mistaken. We thought our video was there. They never used it, but there might be a temporary strike. And if that happens enough time to sites, they can get shut down. Lots of minority and female YouTube content creators are very familiar with this because that's a very common tactic. Mm-hmm. So basically, Hikaru Nakamura's channel went out and did that. They're now saying it was basically his channel producer, and there's been a fallout. Essentially, she has been fired, demoted, etc., across a lot of things. But part of what happened with this is a lot of dirty laundry about Hikaru Nakamura, one of the best United States chess players ever, but also one of the most I've heard him described as toxic, and has over the years established lots of patterns of bad behavior. And it reminded me of Michael Jordan, because he has done a lot to rehab his image with the advent of esports and Twitch and COVID basically making internet chess much more huge than it was in the past. He has kind of become the face of that, and he's got a very smart team around him, is what I'm hearing. But then you have a bunch of people saying, oh, off the court, he's a jackass or whatever, which is rough because, when you find out about, your quote unquote heroes, you're like, oh man, but that's like Michael Jordan, right? Yeah. Michael Jordan had an amazing image in the 80s and 90s. And then you could probably talk to any given NBA player or front office, and they'd probably have some story about Michael Jordan being a jerk to them, right? He took that personally. Yeah. But the very, very last part of this, Patrick, that I think you would have to find hilarious is, at one point, one of the players that he has beef with, there is video of this. They were playing a game of blitz, just chess blitz. They got so mad at each other, Hikaru Nakamura challenged the guy to a fight for $1,000. There is video.
Physical fight?
What?
A physical fight?
A physical fight. Now, whatever you think about top tier chess players and their athleticism, you are correct.
Hey, Dre, what about the sport of chess boxing? I'm sure you've seen chess boxing before.
So basically, they turned it into wizards chess?
No, they just went and fought outside. So there is video of Hikaru Nakamura and one of the
they had the fight?
There is a fight outside. You can look up Hikaru Nakamura versus Eric Hansen. There is a fight outside between the two of them. And then there are other, what's weird is there are other really well-known grandmasters. Yasser Seirawan is there talking about how Hikaru gave him, the content. He gave him his ring and his and like his money clip because he didn't want him on it when he was fighting. And he was joking that he was going to keep the money when he was done. He said he'd give back the ring, his but it is one of the most hilarious and stupid things ever. So it's one of these where the real drama is real and there's stuff there, but then the dirty laundry on Earth that was kind of before the internet boom. It's like there's a video of one of the
never
best
get
United
to know
States.
Your heroes.
Yeah, it's true. It's rough, but I thought you'd get a kick out of that. And yeah, like I said,
I find that very amusing, that story.
Yep. All right. Well, anything you wanna sign off on, Patrick, before you head out?
I can't think of anything right now. Nothing pithy to say.
We avoided talking about Anthony Edwards, so that's that. And I'll just throw out the Nuggets I'm happy with. They did finally have a winning streak broken, but the Aaron Gordon pickup is working well. Michael Porter Jr. as a draft
Speaking
pick.
of chess, have you read about him? He's a very avid chess player.
Really? Aaron Gordon?
Yeah.
I'm going to have to look this up. I'm going to have to see if there's a way for him to challenge him.
He has really insightful things to say about it, yeah.
Okay, that is
not what you would expect from an NBA player.
Well, actually, some of them. I mean, like Andre Iguodala, JaVale McGee. Some of these players, like you hear, and you're like, wow, who knows? It's all over the place. I'm gonna have to look that up.
No, but I guess what I mean is like, chess is not like, and in fact, Aaron Gordon talks about this a little bit. Chess is like not the kind of sport that lends itself well to the folks that have like this crazy bias for action, like most athletes have.
Oh yeah, because you kind of have to sit and wait.
You have to kind of sit still and just chill. And Aaron Gordon talks about that a little bit, which I think is really fascinating.
He's from the Bay Area, so of course he's good at chess, right? He knows.
I love it. I am looking that up.
Kind of like weird reverse Ivy League school elitism is that.
Oh, just everyone in the area is chill, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, Patrick.
Right, I gotta go.
Okay.
I'll talk to you all later.
All right, sounds good. I'll let you do your sign off, Brian, and then I'll head us out.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thanks for seeing you, Patrick.
All right, so Dre, what I'll do a shout out to the comments we've gotten actually, because we wanted to get in Patrick's stuff, but I always like to mention the comments too, right? So I'm gonna bring these up, and we had 3 really good ones.
I'm remiss. Yeah, I'm remiss because that was a regular part, and then when we stopped going weekly / bi-weekly to bi-weekly / monthly, I always forget that. So thank you for doing that.
Absolutely, and this is from April 1st from Chris Ye. He brings up that not just Florida had Horford, Noah, and Corey Brewer as well. Also, the UCLA matchup that they had with Westbrook, Collison, Mbah Moute, and Aflalo. That whole, NCAA postseason was stacked with NBA players, similar to, not quite as much as that early 90s when we were talking about, but great reference by Chris Ye. He also mentioned
I was rooting for UCLA when they did that upset on Michigan, kind of live, right?
Yeah.
We for those that don't know, the last
2006 is the year I should mention.
Okay, I was gonna just say though, with our last show with Ty Willinghams, he was basically saying Michigan was the last hope for his bracket, and then while we were recording that, UCLA took them down. It would have been nice for them to go further. Although one nice end of the March Madness tournament I'll throw out there is Gonzaga lost despite being great shooting, but they lost to really, really good rebounding out of Baylor. The Boxscore Geeks show, defense. Rebounding is underrated, so Baylor won with rebounding. Shout out.
Interestingly, those Baylor guards look pretty good in box score stats, so we could see some of those Baylor guards in the NBA. And of course, Gonzaga is going to put 3 to 4 players, if not more, into the NBA. What a stacked team that was.
I think I said, unfortunately, I don't think he's bad. I mean, his numbers are good, but Suggs has me worried with his 3-point shooting in the NCAA.
He's so good, though, Dre. He's so good. Just watch him. The numbers back it up. He's good.
So
he does need the 3-point shooting, though.
Is it Time or Timmy? How do you say Drew's
Timmy?
Timmy.
Yep.
I'm inclined to think, if he gets a chance, because that's what I'm worried about. I'm worried that he's going to fall to the late second round and maybe turn into a who was the player that kind of flamed out because he kind of burned bridges on the Warriors? Jordan Bell?
Oh, Jordan Bell. That's funny. I don't know anything about Timmy's personality, but I'm not even sure if he's coming out because I think he's only a sophomore, so he may play another year.
He needs to come out if he, like we were talking
about. He should because people saw him play in the finals, right?
Getting to the Final Four, there is nothing he can do in the next year. He would need to double all of his stats to make it worth it. He needs to come out. And, you know, the logic we've made is come out to the NBA. If you're a second round pick, that's a couple $100,000 at minimum. I think it's gone up even. I think it's like $500,000 a year for like 2 seasons. You put that money in the bank and you can go to any school you want. Like there is nothing in school that's worth it beyond maybe the joy of a national title. And I think one of the players, this was a weird stat I found, Brian. So Joakim Noah has like 13,000 minutes less than Kevin Durant, and you know, Kevin Durant's missed like 2 full seasons injury. They were I didn't realize that Noah and Durant were in the same draft. Which is shocking.
So was Noah a senior or junior? Or
he was a senior.
Okay.
But that's the thing is I think he came from money, and I think to him going back to Florida and winning back-to-back titles was worth more than the, you know, money that it would have been to come out. You know, the things you can't, as Patrick's saying, right? If you have a lot of money, you can spend it on a lot of things, but you can never buy a national title.
Noah's dad is a professional tennis player. Is that right?
Holy cow! I did not know that.
Well, I'm just trying to remember why his family had money. But yeah, his dad, I think, was some kind of a pro athlete.
But yeah, so unless Timmy really wants a national title, come out. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, seriously. And before I continue on the comments, I'll say last thing on NCAA. The men's tournament was pretty hype, that UCLA game and some of the other ones. But the women's tournament was even more hype. We got to see Arizona beat UConn and then lose in a very close, epic game to Stanford in the finals. Great to see 2 West Coast teams playing in the women's finals.
And I had to throw this out. I think what you've told me, what Stanford routinely wins the President's Cup, right? That's like all.
Yeah, is that all sports combined. Yeah, the President's Cup.
And one thing I asked, so you just brought up Chris Ye, friend of the show. And it's funny because we had him on a show once to talk his insane birthday pick. So for his birthday, he said he wanted a Lakers title, a Dodgers title, and a Biden victory. And he got all 3. And so when Stanford won, I actually texted him or tweeted him and said, hey, was this one of your picks too, or just icing? And he got to say it was just icing, but he was actually around at Stanford, I think last time the women won a title. So that's awesome too.
It might be the Director's Cup. I'm not sure, but it's something like that.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. We got 2 more comments, right? I believe. I think the second one is super duper long, so I don't know if you want to read the whole thing. And I disagree with it, by the way. But or actually, I think that was on my post on the Warriors, so that might not be the last show. So anyway, continue.
The second one is from another epic commenter. Thanks for commenting. Rebounds and threes, also on April 1st. Brian is rocking a mullet, a big Mike Gundy fan. The thing I'll say is it's actually not a mullet because a mullet is business in the front and a party in the back. I'm actually a party in the front right now too. But the point stands
that you've basically got the mic.
Yeah, I have gone full country to rebound. I have gone full country. If you're on the audio only, I even have a trucker hat on right now. So yeah, I am.
I don't know if Zoom is just cutting you out, but I haven't seen you on the show.
Because I do a separate video feed because if the Zoom dies, then I'll be there if you guys are gone. That's why.
Gotcha. Oh, nice.
But
okay.
Anyway, yes, rebounds and 3 is right. I've gone full country during the pandemic. Shout out to Mike Gundy.
Oh no, and this last comment I actually agree with. I was thinking of a different comment that we won't have time to get to, but someone disagreed with my take on the Warriors. They said they were a well-run team. We'll save that for later if I come back to Wiseman again.
Oh yeah, no, this last one is from Westchester Bruin. He's just making a comment about how to display stats on the site, I think. So I haven't dissected it, but it looks like an interesting argument.
So the basic point is on the site, Patrick did something very simple, which is points per shot, which is you take the total number of points a player scores, divide by the total number of shots, points per shot, which is essentially a, roundabout way of kind of doing net true shooting. And what he's noting is that points per shot, a way a lot of other sites do it, which I have no fault with and think it makes complete sense, is you take a look at the, value you actually get from the made shots. And that's what you want to look at because free throws are kind of their own category and was suggesting another thing. And I'm gonna say, don't even disagree, especially if other sites do it. I know that's one of the weird, hard parts of the analytics section is you've got all these people working on things on their own, and some of us will come up with name things, and we don't have like a standard governing body to name things. So you might have multiple metrics with the same name. I know that's actually one problem with wins produced and win shares, right? Is they're so close in title, so close in what they do, one being made the right way, one being made impressively good for a hobbyist. But people will conflate the two, confuse the two. That happens all the time. So Westchester Bruin, I 100% agree, and I'll have to look into it. It's just, one of those other things to add to the back burner, but definitely that kind of comment, we say this all the time, the Boxscore Geeks show has the best commenters. That's why we haven't shut down the comment section. And it's stuff like that. So definitely appreciate that.
I got one last one, Dre. Okay. This is actually, we got hit up on Twitter from Robert Vodicka, saying that the 76ers team page is down, and that's true. I was talking to Patrick before the show, and we didn't get very far. So yeah, well, I guess you guys will have to look into the 76ers.
I'll look into the 76ers and why we hate them, apparently. Maybe we're just, on the last show I was saying how angry I was with Daryl Morey and Doc Rivers for getting to take credit for essentially Hinkie's team. And so I'm like, no, you don't get any advanced analytics love, because Embiid and Ben Simmons look great, and I don't want the world to know, because you don't deserve for the world to know. We'll fix that. Hopefully by the time this shows up, we'll have something moving on that. I've got two quick shout outs, Brian. That can be the show.
Yep.
The first is to Joe Musgrove, which is, we love these kind of sports stories, which is just basically, he was a San Diego kid. He now pitches for the San Diego Padres. And he pitched the first no-hitter for San Diego. San Diego, I looked this up, we were talking, there have been no-hitters thrown in Petco Park, but he is the first San Diego Padre to throw a no-hitter, and so close, by the way, to a perfect game. He basically had hit a batter with the ball. If that hadn't happened, he'd have a perfect game, but a no-hitter, amazing feat. And that's just there are things in sports we like. That's a feel-good story, amazing to know. And the other one, I hope I get his last name correct, is Anthony Neuer, who converted a 7-10 split in televised bowling in the U.S. Open. And what is truly, truly amazing about this is that has only happened 3 times in televised history before that. And for what it's worth, bowling, you might think of bowling as like a less than sport, right, compared to the others. There's a really great documentary called The League of Ordinary Gentlemen about this. Actually, a group of Microsoft engineers actually purchased the Professional Bowling Association, kind of brought it back after it was kind of faltering for a while, and obviously it's still around. Bowling has been televised forever. That is an amazing feat. And of course, the funny thing is, if you look at the game, I think his opponent had like almost a perfect game, but of course he's going to be remembered for the 7-10 split forever, because that is one of the rarest feats in sports history. I mean, I looked up no-hitters. I believe Musgrove's, it was one of the low 300s, like 306th or something. That's like the 306th no-hitter in 145 years of Major League Baseball play. That is the 4th 7-10 split ever. And bowling, I know, has been televised for at least 40, 50 years at this point.
Yeah. Shout out to Pete Weber, the old school heel of the PBA, who was very flamboyant on the old TV broadcasts.
So one of the awesome things about Pete Weber, by the way, he actually makes the call, kind of. So I believe, so correct me if I'm wrong, commenters, but if you watch the newer video, which is popular, when he gets the 7-10 split initially, one of the commenters says, come on, man, that's Pete Weber. Pete Weber, who has one of the most infamous lines in professional sports history. Who do you think you are? I am. Absolute legend. Love it.
That's right.
And he's explained it after the fact, for those that don't know the story of this. After he won, I believe it was a U.S. championship, a U.S. Open, a major tournament. He said when he won, he said, yeah. And he looked at the crowd and said, who do you think you are? I am. He explained after the fact that what happened is there was someone heckling him during the game, and he wanted to turn around when he was done and say, who do you think you are heckling me during this? It's my championship. I'm the one that won. And he was so excited for winning such a major event that, like, you've seen this on the show, right, Brian? You're talking, your brain's like, I'm not going to do words right now, and that happened, but it was mic'd up because of, like you're saying, the way he does inflection, his hand movements, everything. It's just one of these perfect things that just caught on, and it's part of the lexicon now, which is truly remarkable for a first ballot Hall of Fame athlete.
That's right, damn right, the PBA.
All right, well, I'm happy to have gotten a show in, Brian. We'll have more to talk in the future. We will try and fix Philadelphia before then, which, at current rate means 2 weeks to a month at this point.
2
This
weeks?
has been the 2 weeks. I'd be okay with that. This has been the Boxscore Geeks show. As mentioned, I'm your host, Jay Alvarez, aka Nerd Numbers. Brian Foster, found on Twitter as Boxscore Brian, and Patrick, who left before I could ramble even more, NBA Geek on Twitter. Thanks so much for watching. Look for us iTunes and Stitcher, the Boxscore Geeks show. And heck, we're going live semi-regularly, twitch.tv/nerd numbers. See you next time.